Welcome everybody. In this section we're going to learn some more identities. And unfortunately, yes, these do need to be memorized. These are called the sum and difference formulas. Here's the first one. Sine of A plus or minus B equals sine of A cosine of B plus or minus cosine of A sine of B. This is actually shorthand for two different formulas. And what it's telling us is that the sine of A plus B is sine of A cosine of B plus cosine of A sine of B. And that the formula for sine of A minus B is similar, but with A minus in the middle. So this one's equal to sine of A cosine of B minus cosine of A sine of B. And if you prefer, of course, you can memorize these two separately. I like to memorize this version because that way it feels like I'm only memorizing one formula, but it's completely up to you. There's also one for cosine, and notice that in the cosine formula, I have cosine of A plus or minus B, just like we had in the sine formula, but over here, notice that it's not a plus minus, it's a minus plus. And that is saying that the plus goes with the minus and the minus goes with the plus. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. Cosine of A plus B is cosine of A cosine of B minus sine of A sine of B. And cosine of A minus B is equal to cosine of A cosine of B plus sine of A sine of B. And again, you can either memorize the two separate versions or the one that's together. Here's an example of using these. Let's find the exact value of cosine of 15 degrees. And the thing to notice here is that 15 degrees is the difference between 45 degrees and 30 degrees. And I know what both of those are, so the cosine formula will help me. It'll tell me I have cosine of 45 degrees times the cosine of 30 degrees plus, okay, that's because the minus in the cosine formula goes with a plus. So I have plus sine of 45 degrees, sine of 30 degrees. And because I know all of those, I can just put in what they are. Cosine of 45 degrees is root 2 over 2. Cosine of 30 degrees is 1/2. And then I have plus sine of 45 degrees is root 2 over 2. And sine of 30 degrees, oops, I got that backwards. The cosine of 30 degrees should have been root 3 over 2. And the sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. So that gives us root 6 over 4 plus root 2 over 4. We have the same denominator, so I can simplify by simply adding the numerators. Root 6 plus root 2 over 4. And that's as far as I can go with that because we don't have a rule for adding root 6 plus root 2. Before we leave this example and move on, I just want to point out that I'm using the degree symbol everywhere that I have a degree measure of an angle. And now that you guys know about radians, it should be clear why that is. You see, if I don't put the degree symbol on, I'm saying that the degree measure, or that the angle measure rather, is in radians, not degrees. So it would be like saying something was 2 inches away versus 2 miles away. We have to put that degree symbol in when we're working in degrees. Okay, enough said about that. Let's go on and find the exact value of the sine of 7 pi over 12. Now, a little trick here is to realize that when you have a 12 denominator, you're probably going to be using one of these identities because twelfths can be expressed in terms of thirds and fourths. So 7 pi over 12, in other words, I can express as pi over 3 plus pi over 4. Why is that? Well, if I get an LCD to do this addition, I would multiply the first guy by 4 over 4. I'd multiply the second guy by 3 over 3. And that will give me, what will that give me? 4 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 12. In other words, 7 pi over 12. So I don't know how practical this is, but when it comes to trig classes and possibly your follow-up class, just that's something to be familiar with, that you can rewrite twelfths in terms of thirds and fourths. How does that help us? Well, let's write down the problem. I'm labeling my calculation. I'm going to calculate sine of 7 pi over 12, so I'm saying here that's what I'm calculating. So equals, and then as we just figured out, that 7 pi over 12 I can express as pi over 3 plus pi over 4. And now that I've got the 7 pi over 12 sort of split apart that way, now I will use the sine addition formula. So the sine addition formula says I'm going to have sine of pi over 3 times cosine of pi over 4 plus cosine of pi over 3 times sine of pi over 4. Let's go up and look at that, just to make sure. So yeah, the sine addition formula goes sine, cosine, cosine, sine, and the plus goes with the plus. That's how I remember these personally. We're ready now to evaluate by putting in the values of, let's see, sine of pi over 3, that's root 3 over 2. Cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. And then I have plus. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. And sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. So that simplifies to root 6 plus root 2 over 4.